The sitting is resumed.
Recommittal government notices.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to give notice of the Barbados Identity Management Bill 2021, also of the Bills of Exchange Amendment Bill 2021, and the National Payment Systems Bill 2021. I also beg to give notice of the resolution to grant the sum of $165,336,758 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020-2021 as shown in supplementary estimates number 9, 2020-2021.
Recommittal first readings of bills. First readings.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Beg to move the first reading of the Barbados Identity Management Bill 2021 and the Bills of Exchange Amendment Bill 2021 and the National Payment System Bill 2021.
The question is that the aforementioned bills be read the first time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Government business recommitted, sir. And order number 3, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee to consider the grant of sums of money for the service of this island.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Standing Finance Committee.
I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave this chair and that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee.
The question is that the Speaker do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee.
In the name of the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the passing of a resolution to grant the sum of $165,336,758 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020 to 2021 as shown in the supplementary estimates number 9, 2020 to 2021, which form the schedule to the resolution. Head 92, Ministry of Energy, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, in the amount of $3,500,000.
Honourable Member for St. James Central.
I thank you, Madam Chair, and I rise to urge that this Honourable Chamber facilitate and support the extraordinary and urgent drawdown in the sum of $3.5 million for disbursement in order to assist small business and micro business owners and operators that will be affected during the period of national pause beginning from midnight tonight and continuing until the 17th of February 2021. Madam Chair, I should say at the very beginning that it is intended that this disbursement will be facilitated via the institution known as Fund Access and that known as the Barbados Trust Loans Limited, because the Ministry of Energy, Commerce and Energy, Entrepreneurship and Small Business does not have the infrastructure to manage a process of this nature, so that by way of a service agreement between ourselves and the trust loans and the fund access, we will therefore make those funds available to those beneficiaries who fall within the micro business sector, as has been committed to this country by your humble servant via a different means at a different time, on a previous occasion. Now, ma'am, for the purposes of clarity of exposition, I really want to begin by thanking the staff of the Ministry of Energy and Entrepreneurship, and ma'am, most particularly those members of staff in the Department of Commerce and also in the Trust Loans itself, because they would have worked tirelessly over the course of the period of time. I made the announcement to the country on Thursday evening after getting the imprimatur of the Cabinet of Barbados to be able to speak to the country, and they would have worked without break, without respite, until perhaps sometime on Sunday afternoon, when they would have obviously paused for lunch. And ma'am, I genuinely want to thank those members of staff for making it possible for us to be in a position where, without previous notice of that which was coming, they would have had to have been able to respond to what we now know for certain is over 7,827 applications, which would have been sent in online. They continue to come in, so obviously, ma'am, at a further future date, we will come back to this place with a view to doing those things that need to be done in order to give purpose to the commitment of government to come to the assistance of micro business operators in Barbados. But ma'am, this has been a heroic undertaking, and it is an entirely unprecedented undertaking. And I want, therefore, to begin not only by thanking the members of staff who have facilitated this, but my colleagues in the government and in cabinet in particular, who have lent their support to this initiative, and without whose support and blessing this could not have been possible. Ma'am, the circumstances which confront the small and micro business sector in this country are dire. It cannot be overstated, ma'am. All of us know somebody who is doing a business, who is trying to earn a living in this country honestly and legitimately. But ma'am, the circumstances which confront them are hostile. Fact of the matter is, we have just, and I being candid, in no way political, we have just come out of what has been commonly understood on the streets of Barbados to have been a lost decade, 10 years of difficulty and pain. The economy starts to pick up, ma'am, and people once again start to get a feel that, you know, we can make it through, and along comes COVID. And a shutdown took place last year, which set everybody back, from the largest in this country to the smallest. But it is a matter of social reality, not only socio-economic record for those who pause and study these things. And I urge Barbadians to study these things, read about them. The world over, wherever we have had a cessation of business, the economy grinds to a virtual halt. The shoulders upon which the heaviest burden falls are those who are the most vulnerable in the society. And in the context of business, ma'am, the micro business people, the so-called one man, the craft vendor, the person who has one truck and he is doing freighting, the mechanic, ma'am, the operator of a food van, the vendors, those people, ma'am, are the ones upon whose shoulders traditionally the pain has fallen heaviest. Now, unlike what has happened all around the world, where glib commitments have been given, and in difficult circumstances, I do not cry foul against any government anywhere, because none are able, ma'am, to satisfactorily respond. But what, unlike has happened with the rest of the world, and I come more narrow in the rest of the Caribbean, ma'am, this government has committed itself to struggle in order to make sure that we are able to provide a subsidy. Not a compensation, ma'am, but a subsidy. to every operator of small business in Barbados, micro business in Barbados, who is able to genuinely demonstrate that he or she has been in this field of endeavor prior to the cessation that is now going to come upon us by way of the national pause. It therefore meant that we had to, first of all, invite the applications of expression of interest, which I did on Thursday when I addressed the nation, ma'am. And after that, we had to make sure that those expressions of interest were properly processed, and that is what required the staff of the ministry, and together with the staff of the trust loans, to whom I am eternally indebted, to work without respite over the course of the weekend in order to make sure, ma'am, that we were able not just to process applications, but to do the necessary due diligence. Because, ma'am, believe it or not, in these most difficult of times, it is still within the capacity of some misguided folks in this country to submit an application which suggests that they hold a liquor license, but cannot give to the people who are in authority any evidence of a shop or any evidence of a history of that shop's operation. It is unfortunately, ma'am, still within the capacity of some folks in Barbados to be able to submit an application for assistance, for example, ma'am, arising out of the operation of a taxi. And that license that the taxi operates under is then, when you do the necessary auditing and the cross-referencing, that same taxi is operated allegedly by 5 or 6 different national insurance, not national insurance, 5 or 6 other national ID numbers. And therefore, ma'am, it becomes very difficult for us to do these things when we are confronted with the approach that is so distinctly unhelpful, and which suggests that people would try to game and disadvantage the system purely for the purposes of narrow personal gain. Well, ma'am, the government does not intend to turn its face away from that type of behavior, but equally, we can't allow Peter to pay for Paul, and we can't allow people who are genuinely in need and genuinely suffering to continue to suffer because there are a few who wish to behave in a completely unacceptable way. Ma'am, it is equally unfortunate that I have to say it is not right for government employees to be trying to make a case in circumstances where it becomes very clear by virtue of the fact that they have used a government email address that they ought not to be making this type of case. So that, ma'am, we know that there is always the temptation, but it is most unhelpful in these circumstances for people to try to disadvantage the system, because the system is already very fragile. And we are already, all of us in Barbados know that what we are trying to do is without precedent in this country and without precedent anywhere in the Caribbean. I invite any member of this place, ma'am, to rise and say to the contrary, that they can point to a single territory in the Caribbean or even around the world where there is a government that has invited all who are able to demonstrate that they are in a position to say authentically and legitimately that they have been operating a business, that the government is going to step in and offer them some sort of a subsidy and assistance. And ma'am, what we are trying to do really is to help people get through this very, very difficult period. And it is not a package of compensation. To say that it was compensation, ma'am, would mean that we're able to calculate with some degree of specificity the exact loss of earnings that a particular business place has suffered. And we all know that that is what we cannot do. But what we are trying to do, ma'am, is to respond to what is at present before us in the form of 4,869 processed and filtered applications, audited, if you will, and, ma'am, the additional 2,958, which are still online, still being worked on, as recently as last night when I last had my conversation with the Minister of Finance, so that he would be in a position to know that 7,827 plus are going to be before the Ministry of Finance for assistance up until the most recent figures that I have available. And ma'am, they include the shops as well. And the country needs to know that, again, we have heard the cry of Barbadians who feel discomforted by virtue of the situation with regard to closure of the shops. It is a necessity. We go there with the greatest possible reluctance, Madam Chair, but we must do this because, as I have said before, there is a temptation in Barbados' culture for shops not only to be a place where you go and conduct business and be dispatched and go back along home, but also to be a place where you have an environment of comfort. And that environment of comfort is a deep concern to the Ministry of Health and its officials who have seen all across Barbados. And I myself, ma'am, must say, I too have seen it as recently as yesterday, the persistence of folks liming and not paying attention to the protocols. And if we do not pay attention to the protocols, we cannot get past this problem as a country. We are dealing in Barbados today with a strain of the virus from the United Kingdom, which is known as the UK virus. It is proven to be here. Ma'am, it is virulent. It is more contagious than that which previously represented itself as COVID-19 simple. And ma'am, the danger is that in a small society like this, with very dense populations in some districts, it cannot be allowed to run amok because it threatens to overwhelm the capacity of our healthcare system. And so therefore, all of us must pay heed to this and be our brother's keeper. When I can see in my constituency, ma'am, people sitting next to a shop without masks and passing a spliff from one to the other, then ma'am, I am saying that there's recklessness. And I must say so to my constituents. Young men, you are being reckless. If I can see you with a spliff and you take it from your lips and you pass it to a man sitting next to you without a mask too, and he put it in his mouth and then you pass it to the next body, you are being absolutely reckless. And it has to stop. And all of these young people, all bar none, have somebody cooking for them at home who should be saying to them, if you don't get your act together, don't come back in here and eat. All bar none have a granny and an auntie or a mummy or a big sister who is caring for them. And we have to stop this foolishness now, ma'am, of believing that the government of Barbados can be big brother and big sister to us all, because it cannot work. And I have a duty to say that candidly to this country. It cannot work. All of us know that these are people who have family. All of us have family ourselves. And we have to be our brother's keeper. We have to maintain a certain sense of reality about that which is confronting this country. Because all it takes is for one to become 4, for 4 to become 16, for 16 one day to become 164, for 164 to become 1,664, and on it goes. And given the percentage, I heard very recently that there are 2 or 3% who will die, that also tells a very unfortunate and tragic tale. No, ma'am, who benefits? As I said, ma'am, all benefit. And right now we have a wide range. I did not know there was such a wide range of business operation taking place in Barbados. And it allows me now to say, as minister responsible for small business, that again, I have identified a flaw. And we have to correct it. And we will move with dispatch to do that. Because there has to be wider and better registration. There has to be a way of making sure that there are standards. There has to be a way of making sure that people are part of the system and that the system is able to relate to people who are operating. So that for those people who have been able to genuinely demonstrate what they do, then we must be able to work with them and partner with them in their development. And we must discourage folks from disappearing under the radar, because we can't help develop business if we don't know that the business is existing in a formal way. And that therefore means, and I must say this as well, that we need for people now to be part of the NIS system. I am reliably informed that at a minimum payment of about $20 to $25 a week, one can be compliant with the NIS. And if you're selling coconut water, for example, ma'am, that really is that you're selling 2 bottles. The first 2 bottles, that's NIS money. Then let me get on with the rest of the business. Come into the system. Because today, the challenge for the Ministry of Finance, the challenge for the Ministry of Commerce will be to make certain that you are able to reach out to the vendors who are selling along the highway but have not registered with anybody. And we want to help those people because they need help too. And where we cannot help, ma'am, that is where the idea of care packages comes from. So I want to say again, because I've listened to the calling programs, I've listened to people on the streets. We have all heard it, ma'am, and I think I must say from this place, there is no substance or legitimacy to any argument that this is in any way a 2 Barbadoses or class contradiction and different treatment of classes and so on and so forth. People, we are bending over backwards to assist people at the most vulnerable level of this society, and where business authenticity cannot be established and legitimacy, then, ma'am, what we are saying is we have 60,000 care packages which are intended to be distributed to vulnerable folks in Barbados as well, and other forms of intervention via the Household Mitigation Unit. Madam Chair, I must say also in closing that there is obviously an ongoing debate about shops and mini-marts. Mini-marts, ma'am, are being adopted to take the pressure off of the supermarkets. But, ma'am, for the reasons that I have just gone into, we cannot, though we would love to, go as wide as all or include all shops into the net. But, ma'am, where we cannot include shops, we have said, and we are demonstrating today by way of this initial drawdown, by way of a supplementary for $3.5 million, that there will be a financial capacity to compensate shopkeepers in Barbados at the rate of $750 per week. Not asking anybody to demonstrate whether they are in fact earning $750 even, or if they're earning more or less. But we are saying that we will offer a subsidy of $750 per week for the 2-week period of shutdown. And, ma'am, with that, we ask Barbadians to collaborate with the government and work with the government in order to try to keep friends and family off of the streets as much as is possible, unless it is absolutely necessary. Let us put aside the liming for a couple of weeks. Let us put aside the temptation to share in the natural environment that we have all lived in Barbados. We won't go and spend a little time with friends outside. But, ma'am, you do this right now with COVID-19 lurking on street corners all around the island, with COVID-19 lurking in every parish and in several districts in some parishes. Ma'am, you do this at peril of your own illness and possible death. We are trying, ma'am, to work with this country, and we are begging the country to work with us in turn. I do not know that I can usefully add much else, so I am obliged to you, Madam Chair. Oh, I beg to move that head 92 stand part.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ma'am. and I appreciate the kind gesture of the all members of Michael East in allowing me to use his position and his microphone. It is not the first or last thing that we have or will share. Absolutely sure. I've listened very carefully to the presentation of the Honourable Minister for Energy and Small Business and so forth. And far be it from me to stand to take any position that does not support assistance to the small business sector in these trying times. Minister would have intimated, in fact, that this is not the totality of the sum that will be provided for this sector. I'm happy to hear that, because though we speak of $3 million, if we understand the size and the value of the sector to the economy of Barbados, we know, in fact, that this sum indeed is a small sum. The minister, however, did indicate numbers which range from between 4,500, perhaps, up to 7,000 persons who have applied for such assistance. And that gave me pause for pause. Several years ago, I know that the number of registered small businesses in this country exceeded 11,000, 12,000 going up there. And I think that people will move with some urgency of dispatch, especially in the current situation, to make their sense of need understood and known, to register their applications for assistance, to the extent that in the circumstances we are somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000, may suggest perhaps that there has been some high degree of fall off in the small business sector in Barbados. It would be good if the minister could have, and it would be good if he could, perhaps in his next submission, give us an idea as to what has befallen this sector in terms of the numbers of persons who are being able to sustain viable operations, who have not closed down. Now, I am not interested in numbers necessarily that hark back to what some people refer to as the lost decade. I'm interested in numbers that reflect the goings-on, reflect the outturn, reflect the changes which would have taken place during the last 3 years in the current period of this present Parliament. It would be good if we could hear what has happened with the numbers. Many businesses we know have closed. I made a point from this position, or next to this position before. Bridgetown was fast becoming a ghost city with a number of shops, number of stores, a number of entities, operations, almost seemingly every day closing down. The story probably must be told as to what is happening to small businesses in Barbados, while we come here to do the good thing and to say as a government we want to prop up those businesses which still exist. The fullest truth has to be heard. The fullest story, let me not say truth, the fullest story has to be heard as to what has happened in this sector over the last 3 years. The sector is significant because of its contribution to the Barbados economy. And some would tell you that when it comes to employment outside of the public service, the public sector, the levels of persons who find employment because of viable small and medium-sized business are substantial. And therefore, it is a significant sector. And I support, therefore, any attempt to provide for it in these trying times. However, whether the minister likes it or not, whether I like it or not, and whether you hear it at the top of Broad Street or in the middle of Swan Street, Honourable Member of St. Peter, the perception still obtains out there that preference often is shown to larger businesses, and the small and medium sector businesses of Barbados are treated as second cousins, or sometimes merely acquaintances That perception has to be corrected. It could only be corrected by policy that allows for better capitalization of these businesses. Could only be changed by policy that irrefutably makes it clear that there's no discrimination, and that when administrative strictures are to be put in place, there's no seeming bias towards the big business sector or bias against the small business sector, as there has been in this, especially most recent case with reference to the small shops. We cannot implement a policy that reflects upon the operations of supermarkets and not understand that it has implications for perceived policy positions, whether expressed or not expressed, with reference to the small business sector. Anything you put in place for the supermarkets as an administrative stroke or a policy position has implications as to how the smaller operations should be treated, or would have implications for how the perception is had as to government's relationship with the smaller operations. I hope I made that clear. I went all around the world there, which I tend to do often, perhaps even confusing myself, but I'm sure that you understand clearly, Madam Chair, what I am trying to say. The perception is there, and government must, by its policy and administrative positions, ensure that that perception is eradicated, and honestly and meaningfully so, by removing anything that suggests that there is a bias or a preference, or that certain sectors have greater levels of influence over the government. Now, I would hope that disbursements will be impartial and transparent. We can never close our eyes to the fact that we are part of a political reality. We can never close our eyes to the fact that there's political capital to be lost or gained with everything that we do. And not everybody, and I'm sure the honorable member of St. James Central is not guided by such a disposition as to let considerations for further political capital guide him in what he seeks to say or seeks to do. But that may not be true of all of us. And it may not be true of people who allow to loom large in their consideration political partisanship. I'm simply saying that when funds are to be disbursed, that transparency will obtain and that accountability will obtain. We come here and we vote monies for various causes, but thereafter we hardly ever know what has become of those funds. I hope that there would be, the minister made reference to the trust fund and fund access, and I hope in fact that there would really be meaningful attempts to expedite the disbursement of these funds. I say that because I recall in a couple of instances recently, the honorable senator who sits in the other place, who represents government's interests up there, but who has a professional functional role in the Small Business Association of Barbados, complaining that government speaks to the fact that it provides funding, but then funds can't be accessed, and the facility is not in place for people to get access to the funds of which government boasts of having provided. That came from her lips. I have said the same, and often from the public you hear those comments, but I make reference to her because she sits in the bosom of this party and represents this party's interest in the other place. In her substantive, functional, professional role, she represents the interests of small business people, and that is her opinion, that government boasts of providing funds and setting up institutional frameworks, but then people cannot access the funds. I hope that that does not prove to be the case. We have seen it too often to be happy about it, that government does provide funding here through the action of this assembly, this parliament, but then it does not reach those for whom it is intended for some reason. Do not know if there are political impediments, do not know if there are bureaucratic impediments, do not know if there's simply a level of inertia in the system. But we cannot repeatedly come to this place and vote monies for good causes and do so with enthusiasm, then for those intended beneficiaries not to receive a cent, or if they do, very little and too late. So my purpose is simply to add those few comments and to support this and to ask for more. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. But I want to underscore the seriousness of the circumstances facing Barbados at this time. And to the extent that the government has taken a very aggressive approach to the management of the pandemic, I want all Barbadians, Madam Chair, to appreciate that what is required of us over the next 2 weeks will in fact determine the trajectory with respect to the overall performance of the economy for the remainder of not just the financial year, but certainly 2021. And to the extent that this particular measure that we're discussing, and we will come to health shortly, is really intended to signal to Barbadians that this national pause, Madam Chair, is very different from last year. And whilst persons may wish to focus on whether or not the monies being disbursed represent their level of income that they may receive on a daily or even a weekly basis as we go forward, Madam Chair. The reality is, as the Minister intimated in his presentation, the number of cases that have risen in January and the trajectory with which we have seen the costs associated with managing that, which, as I said, we'll come to in a minute, means that we must pull the brakes up very sharply, Madam Chair, and to signal to Barbadians that the government is taking this so seriously that the measures that we are now asking Barbadians to conform to, that this really represents an extension of the public health protocols that have been rolled out for almost the past year. Because we literally, Madam Chair, have to stop persons from moving around. And the last occasion that we went into this form of restriction, Madam Chair, there was still a considerable amount of activity taking place on a daily basis. And I want to, and I'm sure the Minister of Health will speak to this in greater detail, but the circumstances with respect to COVID in Barbados in 2021 is different from what it was in 2020. And in a real sense, the real impact perhaps of the pandemic has now reached Barbados. And to that extent, this particular intervention, while some may regard it as small and meager, is intended to give some support and some relief for the next 2 weeks. But I want to signal to Barbadians that what each of us does in the next 2 weeks, and it's unfortunate that even though we have tried to signal to persons the kinds of behaviors that we would like to see, and some people may magically believe that at midnight tonight is when they will get serious, but the point is, I want to urge all Barbadians that this government will continue to be vigilant and will continue to put the resources available to all of our agencies to respond to this crisis. But each of us, Madam Chair, each of us has a very particular responsibility for determining how we will move past this point. And we have not insisted in the same way as we did last year with respect to the response from a business perspective, in that last year there were conditions attached to the relief that the government offered. Persons had to be registered certainly with the NIS, persons had to be up to date with respect to their contributions in that respect. They have to be registered and all of those things. The circumstances that we are in now, Madam Chair, dictates that we have to take a much more aggressive approach with respect to what we are doing this time around than last time. And therefore, irrespective of whatever numbers we can put together here to offer any small business, any rum shop, any vendor, any coconut, any barber, any person that's in any of those businesses, is that we must pause, look after the interests of ourselves and our families and our friends, such that in 2 weeks' time, that we can resume some of those activities in a structured way and allow Barbados to start to resume again. There are issues in terms of us being able to right-size the programs that the Leader of the Opposition referred to as part of government. But the reality is, this has to be, in my mind, Madam Chair, be seen as a clear signal to all Barbados that when we say that we are in this together, that this support is meant to be a clear signal that we need each and every one of us to take the responsibility, Madam Chair, of pausing for the next 2 weeks, reduce our movements, such that in 2 weeks' time, we can then have further conversations about what may be required by way of working capital or any other issues as it relates to business. But I see this measure as an extension of the public health protocols that we are putting in place for the next 2 weeks. And I believe that once every Barbadian, every shop owner, every vendor, every citizen adheres to the advice of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, that this 2 week period, we will get through it, so long as we all adhere to the protocols, and then be in a position, Madam Chair, to be able to restart the economy in a way that we know that we ought to be able to do. And to the extent that this $3.5 million is allocated to be able to give that relief or support, that the clear message is that we have to reduce our footprint, we have to reduce the activity, on the advice of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and we are committed to monitoring and understanding what is required for business to get off the ground. But by the same token, Madam Chair, as the Minister indicated, where there's a lot of informality, a lot of it now has to be formalized. And to the extent that we can help, whether small, medium, or other size businesses, requires that each of us make a contribution to the pot. Because at the end of the day, Madam Chair, the economy today is very different from the economy when we started COVID-19 last year. And to the extent that we are able to continue to give support has to be contingent on every citizen, every business being able to participate in a way that allows us to be able to manage this. So, Madam Chair, with those few words, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. James Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In wrapping up very briefly, I want to thank both honourable members who spoke, especially the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, who I thank for his words of support. I want to address frankly and candidly the concern he raised about the political, or the concern about the possibility of political involvement in the distribution of assistance. I begin, ma'am, with not just the funds that we are here to discuss, but the packages, the care packages. It is a matter of public record that the commitment has been given that the care packages to assist the vulnerable across Barbados will be shared by all political parties. The Leader of the Opposition will himself benefit, and the Democratic Labour Party will also benefit. Ma'am, it is true to say that the transfer of funds, once approved by this place, and having already gotten the blessing of the Director of Finance and Economic Affairs for us to be here to do the supplementary, ma'am, then the transfer goes automatically to the trust loans and to the fund access, for them, ma'am, to do that which they must do under a service agreement by way of electronic payments to people's accounts. So there will be the fullest possible transparency and record of that which is being done. I also feel it is important, ma'am, to say very briefly that though the leader of the opposition did not say directly that there is discrimination, he hinted that there is the perception of discrimination against shops. And I want us not to speak out of two sides of our mouths in cathedra, in the House of Assembly, or ex-cathedra outside. Ma'am, if we are going to accept that the government has stepped up to the plate and is prepared to give every shop in Barbados which can establish its legitimacy $750 per week for the next 2 weeks, then, ma'am, there is a subsidization of that shop's business. The reality is, ma'am, there are some shops that we know of by virtue of their size, by virtue of their geographical location, which simply are not going to see $700 or $1,500 in profit over the course of a 2-week period. And that's a reality. There are some shops, yes, in sales. So that even if they were open, ma'am, that $1,500 in sales they were not going to see. And what we are saying is that you're going to get that money, irrespective of what your overheads would have been, because you're not paying any overheads now. The place is closed. There's no freight, there's no storage, there's nothing. The reality is, ma'am, that no utilities, etc. Reality is, ma'am, we are trying to intervene in order to assist a group of people who legitimately had a case, because on the last time there was a shutdown, those folks were included in the right to operate. We get that. The last point I want to make, ma'am, is that there's a need to accept that the response on the last occasion was perhaps a little bit bureaucratic. And the concern that has been raised by the sector that I am privileged to lead has been heard. I thank the honourable member who is Minister of Finance, because he and I would have participated in a Zoom meeting a couple of days ago with persons representing the sector. And the clear argument was made that, you know, the challenges back then, I was not minister at the time, ma'am, but the challenges back then were that the employers were given wage subsidies of $500 to go to an employee, and that really and truly that was contingent on, or it was annexed to an ability to demonstrate that you were up to date with your NIS, and up to date with your taxes, and so on and so forth. And we all know that there are some operations that are not at that stage, and it just did not work. It became unattractive to some businesses, and unfortunately, government, having stepped up to the plate and made $6 million or $8 million available, much of it was left untouched. That is a reality. The thing that government didn't make any money available, it is that the conditions people felt were too onerous. We have said we are going to relax the conditions. But again, I must use this place to speak to the people of Barbados as a whole. And inasmuch as the leader of the opposition has urged us not to be political, then I want to urge him too to speak to the people of Barbados as well, because we need his assistance and that of the other people in politics in this country, irrespective of your political complexion or color. The reality is, ma'am, that we need all persons who are in political leadership to say this. Folks in Barbados must become part of the system. Folks in Barbados must see the wisdom and finally buy into the idea of participating in the formal structure, the NIS, making a contribution by way of taxes, etc. Because when circumstances such as these descend on us, nobody planned for this. This comes upon us. We are being asked to respond to it. Everybody, bar none, is stepping up to the plate and saying, what about me? How you can help me? But we want people to recognize that we can't help unless you have been putting something into the pot. Because right now, the revenue take of the government is less than it has ever been. I don't have the immediate figures at my command, but clearly we have no tourist industry in the middle of what would be the tourist season. You ain't got to go much further than that. Several businesses, as the leader of the opposition has said, have suffered and have closed. And At a future date, because there are a couple of pieces of legislation in the pipeline, I will come back to this place and speak fully to the sector. But today, what I must ask is the cooperation of the Leader of the Opposition and indeed all other political entities outside of Parliament to recognize that we need them to work with us on this messaging that the folks in this country must be part of the system if the system is to be as responsive as we would on a humanitarian basis want it to be. Ma'am, I want to thank you for the privilege of being able to make these submissions, and without any further ado, move that Head 92 stand part.
Question is that Head 92 stand part. All members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 86, Ministry of Health and Wellness, in the amount of $37,465,321.
Honourable member for the city.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise to give some details. Sorry, Madam Chair. I rise to give some details and justifications for the supplementary request from the Ministry of Health and Wellness under Head 86. But before I do so, I would like to start by saying or repeating something that I said at the beginning of this pandemic. I recall saying to the country that unless we adopted an all-of-country approach to this pandemic, then we will find it difficult to win against COVID-19. All of country, because in spite of how many resources we throw behind this thing, in spite of our efforts, if there is no buy-in by every single person in this country, then our efforts could well be in vain. And we've been having that buy-in to a large extent. But there's still some among us who are not taking the current situation in as serious a manner as is required. There's still far too many people who you are seeing in shops and other places, seemingly oblivious to what is happening in Barbados right now, what is happening in the region, and what is happening in the international community. Not wearing masks, bunch up all together, and so on. And I really could not speak this morning without saying that when I interact with my team, especially those on the ground, those who are working extremely long hours in the labs, in the polyclinics, doing contact tracing, doing swabbing, they become very disheartened after their efforts when they walk around and see a number of people who seemingly do not care. And this is something that we really need to address, and address as a matter of urgency. Whilst we may have some control, and it certainly is our responsibility as a government to be able to put things in place to govern movements and so on in public spaces. At best, we have to depend on moral suasion to get everyone else, all of our citizens, all of our residents, all of our visitors, to be able to do the right things when they are in their own private spaces. Having said that, let me go into the request made under Head 86, and you can appreciate, Madam Chair, that the requests for this head had and have to do with the situation that confronts us. We would have planned for a whole set of things from last year. We would have had some supplementaries in order to enhance the operations that we've been mounting. But whenever we believe we have things under control, then situations develop where cases arise, and regrettably, January, we saw a significant increase in cases, a significant outbreak within our country. And so, in order to be able to continue this fight and to plan for future actions, because this is just a battle in the fight against COVID. It is the most significant battle so far, the most significant challenge. And I want to say, and I say to my countrymen and women, because we have one significant battle or challenge facing us after several months of living fairly well, that now is not the time for persons to start to doubt and to question everything. Now is the time for us to unite, to fight against COVID-19. First of all, under primary health care services, you would see a request for financing for the Morris Bayer Polyclinic, also for the Best Dos Santos laboratory services, as well as the Barbados Drug Service. Let's take the laboratory services first. The funding being requested is absolutely necessary in order for us not only to purchase much needed supplies for COVID, but to purchase them in abundance in order for us to be able to sustain current and also future operations. And why do I say that? Because we are seeing from time to time that the global supply chain and transportation trains, sometimes they do not work in our favor. And the lab, for example, which has been going through a trying time, having to do manual extractions because we do not have the supplies for the automated extraction that we would have put in for months ago, last year. That has slowed down operations, and we have to put ourselves in a position to ensure that we do not go there again. And whilst we are still waiting on the suppliers for those commitments which we have made, we decided that we will have to seek elsewhere to try to get supplies into Barbados in quick order so that we can get back to the pace that we are accustomed working at. And so now also the introduction of the antigen rapid tests to be used in certain circumstances, we also have to be able to supply or to purchase those as well. And so the funding that's required for the lab is actually to be able to deal with the current outbreak and for future operations. The Barbados Drug Service, similar situation. The Barbados Drug Service is in the process of purchasing a lot of sanitizing equipment for all of their labs throughout the country in the polyclinics and hospitals, as well as to be able to provide a special urgent care service to be able to get pharmaceuticals to vulnerable persons who require those pharmaceuticals urgently. And also, following the directive from Cabinet to the health service, for us to be able to have at least 5 months supplies in all of our areas of operations. The Morris Bayer Polyclinic is the polyclinic that has the responsibility for operations at the St. Joseph Outpatients Clinic and the one in Belle Plaine, St. Andrew. And those two clinics at the moment are closed and have been closed for a while. I would have indicated in this honorable chamber on a previous occasion the intention of the Ministry of Health and Wellness to refurbish and reopen those two community clinics. And that for us at the time was important even before COVID, because this government stated very, very clearly that community outreach and taking services into the community, empowering communities, that this was going to be one of the hallmarks of our healthcare system and our healthcare effort going forward. And so that was always projected within those plans. However, we now have to be able to facilitate the operations of those 2 outpatient clinics within a COVID environment. In other words, there have to be some adjustments of structures and so forth to be able to allow for the spacing, to be able to allow for separation, to be able to allow for doffing and donning of PPE by staff and those sorts of things. And so that is now vitally important. But I even go further to say that the refurbishment and the reopening of these 2 outpatient clinics are extremely vital to our efforts within the context of community spread in the country to be able to carry the battle into communities. And these 2 centers, these 2 clinics, will play a significant role in this effort. In the case of the outpatients clinic at Horse Hill, when I check the records, what I recognize is that the majority of persons who utilize that clinic are actually older persons rather than younger persons who now have to go to other polyclinics to be able to seek services. And we want to correct this, especially now that we have community spread, and especially since COVID seems to be with us for some time to come. And that's the rationale behind that. We also, because of our increased demand in terms of people going to the polyclinics, increased demand for swabbing and so on within all of the testing centers, increased demand in the quarantine facilities that are run by government. There's also an increased demand for supplies and equipment. And anticipating what is going to be required for the Seek and Save program, as well as when we get to the deployment of vaccinations, that program, we know that we have to increase our supplies in all areas to make sure that we are not found wanting at any point in time. Maintenance of property. Well, we have a number of issues that we have to deal with. For example, we've determined that the Winston Scott Polyclinic, which is the polyclinic over the years where the vaccines, all kinds of vaccines are kept, that is where the immunization program is based. We have the capacity there to be able to store a large number of vaccines. And to be absolutely certain in what we are doing, we are looking at redundancies to the systems there. So yes, there's a general power supply for the facility, and there's an alternate supply as well. And in terms of where the vaccines are stored, they also have a generator capacity. But what we want to do is to make sure that we have all of these things serviced and serviced properly, because we anticipate in the not too distant future that there will be an increased demand on the power supply there when we have the large numbers of vaccines coming into the country. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital has played a significant role in the fight against COVID. And the QEH, like other institutions, would have been impacted by COVID. When we had the lockdown earlier last year, the QEH obviously saw a decline in funding that would have been provided for them because they depended on the health services contribution which working persons were required to make. Because people were not working during that period, a large number of persons, obviously that resulted in reduced revenues. And that obviously meant a problem for the QEH, that aspect of QEH financing. But further than that, the QEH is responsible for the isolation facilities in the country, the management and the operations of those facilities. And those facilities too have come under pressure. Come under pressure, especially with the surge which we are facing, and also the fact, and most importantly, that they've been seeing people, more sick people now than at any other time during the pandemic. Things have reached a stage, and we always had contingency plans, and we initiated the first one, which was to set Blackman Gully back up as a campus of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And we've also gone now as far as we have about 3 hotels that we have investigated. We've had site visits, and we've decided that we will use those as additional isolation facilities, particularly for asymptomatic persons who look well and are able to operate within that kind of environment, so that we can concentrate on those persons who are sick at Harrison Point. Now, the management of these facilities obviously require additional resources. In terms of human resources, for example, the QEH became a bit stretched, and thanks to the Prime Minister and the government of Barbados, we've been able to get a medical team of 15 from Cuba who are here, who are now out of quarantine, and who will be joining, if they haven't started, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the Best Dos Santos lab in helping us to get things going in the direction we want them to go. There are 4 laboratory specialists that will join the lab, and there are 11 doctors, specialists in infection control, respiratory illnesses, also anesthesiology, and 1 or 2 other areas, so that the hospital, the isolation facilities, expanded isolation facilities, will now have some additional medical doctors to be able to deal with any clinical issues arising at those campuses of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. But it also required a lot more equipment as well. PPEs, as you can appreciate, you have different facilities, more PPEs, more staff, more of everything. And so this supplementary is intended to be able to give to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital the necessary funding for its expanded isolation program and everything else that it has to do. For example, at Harrison Point, because of the number of persons who were coming in requiring a respiratory treatment, they were having to be changing oxygen tanks and so on a regular basis, and so the decision was taken to construct a facility there that houses oxygen that would be able to facilitate those persons who require it. So we've been adjusting to situations as they arise, because it is a dynamic situation that is confronting us, and it's not a one-all-fit-all, one-size-fit-all. We've been adjusting from protocols to everything else. And naturally, we must have all of the PPE, all of the resources that are required to be able to fulfill our mandate. And the last thing that I will speak to is the vaccination road deployment. You would have recalled, Madam Chair, that we would have indicated that the government of Barbados joined the Gavi project, COVAX facility, joining 100 and I believe 30 or 40 other countries, making down payments of funds to be able to access vaccines whenever those vaccines became available. We were allocated enough vaccines to cover 20% of the population. But the government of Barbados did not sit and be waiting on that. Although that is there, those vaccines will come, but obviously they were inadequate for us to do what we want, which is to provide vaccines for the entire country, population, residents. And so the government has been having bilaterals and meetings with all sorts of other sources to be able to obtain vaccines that outside of the COVAX facility so that we can purchase in larger numbers. And so we've added some funding to be able to do that, and also to be able to roll out that deployment plan when those vaccines arrive. So we've had to put a number of things in place. And then the Seek and Save program, which would have been mentioned a few days ago, to respond to the fact that we are seeing a number of persons presenting to accident and emergency at a late stage. And when we give them the test, yes, they're positive, and regrettably, very regrettably, far too many did not make it. And again, condolences to the families of those persons, those lovely Barbadians who passed away. So we decided that we'll go with this program, because if people are not coming out and we know that the cases are there, then we need to go into communities. And so the University of the West Indies, about 360 students. Minister Walcott is responsible for this program in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Wellness. But this is to allow us to get into communities to see exactly what is happening and to try to get those persons who have symptoms to be able to come forward so that we can assess them, we can test them, and if they're positive, we can reach them early enough that we can do our best to save lives and give them the chance to be able to live a longer life. And that also is included, that program, that initiative, within these estimates. And so, Madam Chair, with those remarks, I beg to move that Head 86 stand part in the sum of $37,710,321 as amended.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, ma'am. Just a few words in response, with your leave. Again, I don't intend to stand in any way in the way of the effort to provide for funding to help us in the fight against this dreaded thing which is among us and spreading, but to offer words which I hope would bring added dimension to the discussion. Millions of dollars being spent in our response to the threat of COVID in the public attempt to ward it off, to prevent its further spread, to preserve life and health, to ensure our systems are viable in the face of the threat, viable in terms of their capacity to function. But, Madam Chair, millions of dollars are being spent, and this is just an additional supplemental request for more millions to be spent in this cause. Now, many briefings have been shared with the public. Many briefings have engaged the attention of the media. And the position I would like to put, it may be the interest of the Ministry of Health, it may be the interest of the government. I certainly think it is the interest of the people of Barbados. Perhaps the minister should give some consideration, Honourable Minister should give some consideration to having an interim ministerial statement made from this chamber to this chamber and the people of Barbados as to the level of spending which has already taken place relative to the whole operations around the management of the response to the threat of COVID. I think that that is absolutely important. I hear all kinds of things said in briefings to the public, some of which is unnecessary, some of which perhaps said by the wrong people. But that is neither here nor there. At this moment, the point I'm trying to make, it would be good in the interest of this Parliament that votes these monies, and in the interest of the people of Barbados, that the Minister have a statement made in this chamber as to what we have spent thus far in terms of responding to the threat of the monster among us. Because I don't think anybody has any idea, and I don't mean to put the Minister on the spot, but I'm sure he has probably not done the tabulations, and it's not a prize to the extent to which spending has taken place. I would like to think our Ministry of Finance officials would be on top of this. And ultimately, I imagine the information comes through them, but the Parliament should be made to benefit from such a ministerial statement or statement in these chambers that would say to Barbadians up until now, since January of last year, and up until now, we have spent X or Y amount of dollars in responding to the threat of COVID. One big reason for that is because it is taxpayers' money. You know, we have the often and frequent repeated use of this phrase, government spending. It's public spending more than government spending. It's taxpayers' money, it's not government money. Government doesn't have any money. It's taxpayers' money. And therefore, because it is taxpayers' money, they really have a right. They really have a right to know. They have a right to know what is the level of threat we face. They have a right to know how that level of threat, what that level of threat implies for the national health and well-being of this country. They have a right to know what that threat implies for this national security of this country. They have a right to know because it's taxpayers' money that we're spending as to how much money has been spent up until now. Another reason why that statement, in my view, needs to be made, and urgently so, is because the majority of this money, ma'am, is borrowed money. This is money that we are borrowing. This is money that is not being earned by us necessarily as a country from policies of export and growth. These are monies which are borrowed monies which therefore have to be repaid. And they will have to be repaid by persons in this community after we have left this chamber. Majority of us, if not all of us, still have to be repaid beyond that point. Monies which young people out there who struggle today to find employment or meaningful employment or sufficiently well remunerated employment will have to repay. And as such, while we understand the need to spend the money, we really ought to be told how it is in fact being spent and how much we have spent thus far, because it is borrowed money which has to be repaid by the people and Parliament of Barbados when we, those of who occupy this chamber, would have left. Statement, I believe, necessary because we are awarding, I imagine, contracts for jobs. We're awarding contracts for supplies and services in the current situation. And we have no idea how these contracts are being awarded. We are in an emergency situation. And the regimes which perhaps normally which are normally employed are not necessarily being utilized at every instance in the current situation. So to whom are these contracts going? And how are they being awarded for jobs and services and supplies. These are the types of things that Parliament needs to tell the people. These are the types of things that will engender confidence in the people to support the cause of government's policy in the interests of the country. Now, there is some opinion out there, some view out there. There are people who visit this country still, because we're still allowing people to come. The people who visit this country and opt to stay in government-run quarantine facilities. And I'm not talking about Barbadians, I'm talking people who visit this country and who opt to stay in government-operated quarantine facilities. And the view is that their costs of testing, their costs of meal supplies are being funded by the public purse here, taxpayers' money in Barbados. That ought to be spoken on in clear terms. If it is not true, it should be said very clearly, categorically, that that is not the case. If it is the case, it should be acknowledged. And my humble opinion is that it should cease, because I do not know why we would be paying the cost for persons who choose to travel here in the current circumstances. We would be paying costs for meals and for testing if they choose to, if they opt to stay in government-operated quarantine facilities. If you choose to travel at this time with the likelihood that in this fluid context, anything can happen, you ultimately should be prepared for anything. And therefore, you should be prepared if you can be quarantined in privately operated facilities to pay that cost on your own. This government has demonstrated a disposition for some degree of charity in offering to compensate people who have been inconvenienced by the late return of test results and who as a result have incurred added and unanticipated expenditure because of their accommodation arrangements with private sector operators. Now, that is generous, and perhaps, and I've said this publicly and I maintain my position, if by government's pronounced policy, if by government's declared arrangements, it has inadvertently created that liability, then I believe a measure of compensation for that particular outcome should be considered. What I don't agree with, and this I've also said, is that the government should be so charitable and should consider the Barbados brand is so weak that you should be offering people any free ticket for travel back to this place at some future time. I don't agree with that aspect of that. What I'm pointing to here, though, today is the fact that the opinion is held by some that visitors to these shores in these difficult circumstances and who opt, for whatever reason, to stay in government-operated facilities, have their meals paid for by government, have their tests paid, the cost of their tests underwritten by government. And if that is so, I think that that is not the way to go. If it is not so, I think it should be categorically denied that that is the case. We've had, and the minister today referred to this as well, the presence of overseas medical personnel with us here in Barbados for quite some time, since last year, and the numbers are being added to. And I imagine we need all the help that we can get to get a hold of this situation. But is there a cost attaching to the presence of this assistance of medical personnel from overseas? And again, if there's a cost attaching to that, what are the financial arrangements and what is the level of cost associated with having medical specialists, medical personnel from overseas involved in an effort? I think all this information people need to hear. And it's a serious thing that the public needs to be able to consume, terms of information which is given, digested, so that they can understand the level of stress, financial stress that we're up against, the level of pressure that is upon the government's capacity at this time. I think these are things we need to hear, and it goes beyond the grin. It goes beyond the grin of a seeming warm face behind a public microphone when interacting with the media, interacting with the public. Say something which is of substance, that the public may get a better sense of where we are, what we're trying to do, and the level of burden that falls on the government that they've elected in such majority numbers 3 years ago. I humbly suggest that for the minister's consideration. A Seek and Save program, I'm not saying I don't support it, but I hope that we have, as fully as possible, thought through some of the outfall that may result from this effort. May be well-intended and may be absolutely necessary if we're to get a handle on this thing. But we operate in a certain culture in Barbados, and I think we're going to be up against some cultural impediments, and I hope the program does not fail on that basis. I think we're also up against what I call climatic impediments. By that, I mean we're operating in a certain climate in Barbados today. I see people approaching my home. I look with fixed gaze to see how soon I can identify them, see who they are. And I have had a couple of instances, Madam Chair, where people have ended up at my place not intended to be there. And that is the kind of climate in which we now live. People are fairly distrusting of visiting strangers and visiting faces, and are a little bit apprehensive as to their motivation and intention. I'm simply saying this program may absolutely be necessary, and perhaps because we got to get these people tested to know who's out there and what's happening. But we are up against a certain climate. We operate in a certain climate. We're up against certain cultural peculiarities. And I would hate to know that the program fails on the basis of such things, because we did not anticipate these things and put in place the kind of support and aids that can help us to do the program to make sure that it brings the success that we hope for, so we can get a handle on this business. I thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Permit me just to clearly add our support to the measures being introduced by the member for the city, as we know that he has led this effort very courageously. And I want to, as he has asked of Barbadians, that we really redouble all of our efforts to remain in the fight and to ensure that we can protect as many lives in the country as possible. I'm going to be very brief, Madam Chair, but just permit me to ask apologies of the Chamber for a few amendments to Head 86, and just to provide some clarity on the basis of some of the questions that the Leader of the Opposition asked earlier. Now, it has always been our intention, and certainly you would recall during the second reading of the appropriation bill for this year and last year's estimates, at the conclusion of that debate, the Prime Minister indicated a series of interventions as we were going into the early stages of COVID-19 arriving in Barbados, indicated that with respect to expenditures as it relates to health, that we would lay in this chamber all of the contracts certainly over $1 million, in relation to the expedited procurement mechanism that we had to undertake in order to respond to COVID-19. You would know, Madam Chair, that we have just concluded our series of estimates meetings, and it is the intention of this government to lay in this Parliament all of the contracts that were awarded under the expedited procurement process, and just for the benefit of the public and certainly for the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Rule 239 under the financial rules, under the Financial Management and Audit Act, allows the government of Barbados, any institution in any public entity in Barbados, to be able to use expedited procurement on the basis of urgency, speciality, or the circumstances that would allow us to be able to proceed. And therefore, we will lay those contracts, but notwithstanding that, I'm sure that the Minister will respond in kind with respect to the information that's requested. But it has always been our intention to lay those contracts when we come to Parliament with respect to the estimates for this upcoming financial year, which will give the information in terms of whom those contracts were awarded. But certainly over the course of the last year, we have been in oh, sorry.
Point of order, ma'am, and I think my honourable friend might be unintentionally misleading us a bit. I haven't asked for any laying in the house of any contracts over $1 million. That has been promised, and we look forward when that day comes. But you know, there are sums of money below $1 million which are quite substantial as well. So I am not talking about simply any contracts under special procurement mechanisms of over $1 million. The public needs to know the money is being spent over $1 million. You can have just short of $1 million, a lot of money, by 1 cent. That's what I'm talking about. Two different things.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Yes, and as I said, all of the information associated with the expedited procurement will be made available, but the specific contracts over $1 million, we determined that we will lay those in Parliament, given the gravity of the situation. But I want to assure the public that the effort to respond to COVID has not been any, has been precisely to ensure that we can get the resources and the necessary, whether it's equipment, whether it is the supplies with respect to what is required with the laboratories, whether it's the vaccines and all of that. So to the extent that that information will be made available to the public, we will come to the Parliament and lay that information, which be in the chamber, in which case then the chamber will be able to make that information available to the public. But I hear the Leader of the Opposition, but I just wanted to indicate that that has always been our intention, and we will make that information available. Madam Chair, the reality is, though, that from the get-go, we have been responding to the Ministry of Health in terms of being able to ensure that Barbadians can remain safe and to ensure that our health institutions are not overrun in the way that we have seen on network television, if you like, coming from the United States and across the globe. But as I indicated earlier, Madam Chair, I'm just going to make a few amendments to Head 86. Just for the record, we will submit a revised document. But in response specifically to COVID Head, you will recall, and just for clarity, just to help the Leader of the Opposition, in this copy of the resolution, you will see that under sub-program 375 for the QEH, there's $116 million there as grants for public institutions. And in the second column, you see $10,562,000, which was the supplementary that we voted in resolution number 6, you will recall. Now, the Minister in his presentation indicated that because of the reduction in the health service levy, we went through an exercise with the QEH and the Ministry of Health to understand what that shortfall will be given, where the monies that will come from NIS to cover the remainder of the subvention. But unfortunately, in our preparation, in preparing this particular resolution, The 23,633,675 is actually in the incorrect program. You would recall that when we voted resolution number 6, we created a specific head for the management of COVID, which the QEH is responsible for. The minister indicated in his presentation, obviously Harrison Point, Black Mangala, and a number of other facilities that the QEH is managing outside of the existing, or what people in Barbados may refer to as the QEH proper. We created that head to be able to ensure that we track clearly what is being spent on COVID. So the correction here in the resolution would be actually sub-program 0620, which is the management of the COVID-19 QEH head. You would equally recall that when we voted that supplementary, Madam Chair, in October, I believe it was October, we voted $25,121,793 in that COVID head. But let me just indicate, just for clarity for the public, when COVID started at the beginning of this financial year, Madam Chair, the subvention, as you see there, as $116 million. Under any normal circumstance, Madam Chair, that subvention would have been dispersed to the QEH for the most part in roughly 12 equal monthly installments. The QEH would have been receiving, or would have received, under normal circumstances, the monies from the NAS, which would allow them to be able to provide the normal services to the public in the way that they would do. Obviously, with COVID, the additional expenditures to cover COVID, we had to make adjustments to the way we disperse monies to the QEH, and therefore we used the subvention of $116 million much more aggressively by releasing to the QEH earlier than we would ordinarily make the adjustment in order to ensure that they could have covered the COVID-19 expenditures and still provide the services at the main plant of the QEH. And so having created the sub-program and voting the $25 million plus for that, the correction or the adjustment here is just to give clarity in terms of exactly where this money is going. So we have already advanced to the QEH its subvention certainly for this quarter, and that will allow the QEH to continue to provide the services at Martindale Road proper. But this $23 million, Madam Chair, as you would appreciate, given the assumptions that we made in September when we went through this exercise with the QEH and the Ministry of Health about the trajectory, obviously, clearly in terms of the management of COVID, the extraordinary spike in cases in Barbados obviously has facilitated a situation where there's been more testing, the more use of PPE. Obviously, if you have more patients in a short space of time, as you are aware as a medical practitioner in your own right, Madam Chair, that if you have more cases in a very short space of time, then you're going to use a lot more resources than you ordinarily would, as if that was spread out over the course of a longer period of time. And therefore, as a result, we have had to make these resources available to the QEH, and that is why it's so critically important, Madam Chair, that over these next 2 weeks, that Barbadians literally stay at home, only go where they absolutely need to go, because the management of this crisis is really up to each and every one of us. And therefore, to the extent that we have given a commitment that we will respond where we need to respond to the public health crisis, it is certainly within our own power as Barbadians to determine how much money we actually spend in terms of the management of, whether it's Harrison Point, Black Mangala, or any other facility that we stand at. And the reality is this, Madam Chair, we would rather be spending this money in other areas of government to be able to get through this particular period of time. And that is why it's important, the messaging to Barbadians, that once we are prepared as a government to give the resources to the Ministry of Health to manage this pandemic, given that we have set this up specifically to insulate our primary facilities of healthcare, it is absolutely important that each of us follows the protocols such that we don't have to be spending monies in this way to be able to manage the outbreak of the pandemic. And I can't put it any clearer than that, Madam Chair, because if we continue to line and we try to duck around the country and go and visit and socialize, then all that would mean is we have to stand up more facilities, and in standing up more facilities, it means more money being taken from the budget to be able to support it. And whilst we have given that commitment that we will respond to the public health side of the pandemic, it is important for Barbadians to understand that how much money we spend on the COVID aid really depends, for the most part, on us as Barbadians. And that is why I want to continue to urge Barbadians that over these next 2 weeks, what we have given by way of provision in the previous aid, Madam Chair, is an extension of this so that people don't have to move around, so that we can bring these numbers down to manageable proportions. And I really cannot urge any stronger for Barbadians to adhere to the protocols and to follow in that vein. So just the correction in terms of the sub-program, Madam Chair, it is 0620, Management of the COVID-19 QEH, and the grant to public institutions is the $23,633,675 under that specific head, having voted the supplementary earlier this year for $25 million in that specific head. So that is that. The only other adjustment to will come under sub-program 366, COVID-19 prevention and control, under account code 212, Madam Chair, operating expenses. The adjustment there is the change is $1,245,000. Is the change there instead of $1 million, and therefore, and that is to support the stipends with respect to the persons who will be going out to do the swabbing in the communities to ensure that those stipends are accommodated within that. Of course, that means, Madam Chair, that in the addendum there will be the appropriate adjustments there. But what that does is to bring the total as adjusted under Head 86 to $37,710,321. But just to reiterate, Madam Chair, that the management or the amount of resources that we put to the COVID-19 head is directly related to the actions of each and every one of us as Barbadians. And we will find the money, but we would rather find money to do other things, Madam Chair, in the context of the management of the pandemic. And whilst we accept that COVID will be with us for the foreseeable future, part of these monies, as the Minister said, is to roll out to procure vaccines to be able to protect Barbadians. But the reality is, it is within each and every one of us to determine how much is allocated within the context of this. And this has always been intended to be a temporary program, because presumably, Madam Chair, we should reach a point where we will no longer need the use of the facilities that have been stood up to respond to COVID-19, and that is specifically why we have created these sub-programs to be able to track it, and with the help of Barbadians, we will be able to bring this under control, and obviously with the global vaccination efforts, that once the pandemic subsides, then we'll be able to collapse these programs and resume normal business. So with those few words, Madam Chair, I beg to move that Head 86 stand part as amended.
Seconder? Okay, question is that Head 86 with amendment stand part. All honorable members in favor, please. Yes. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 34. No, Head 32, sorry, ma'am. Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. in the amount of $2,280,445.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Yes, Madam Chair, the sums of money associated here, as you know, Barbados was originally scheduled to host UNCTAD 15 in October of 2020. That was subsequently put back initially to April of 2020 and now subsequently to October of 2021. Now, obviously with the forward planning that is required to be able to facilitate this, this sum of $2 million here is intended to purchase some security equipment with respect to the hosting of that event, and therefore to allow us in a position to be able to ensure that we can commence the procurement in time for that. These monies are being brought to account with respect to being able to do this. As part of the government of Barbados has already received US $500,000 from the People's Republic of China to help offset some of the costs, and we anticipate a further US $500,000 from the People's Republic of China with respect to being able to help offset some of these costs associated with this event. Now, the reality is, Madam Chair, is that we have to still forward plan with respect to the execution for when life resumes normality. We are planning, obviously, for the hosting of the event in even though on a smaller scale, later this year, we have to make provisions with respect to having already received some of the monies to be able to start the procurement with respect to that. So I beg to move then that head 32 in the amount of $2,280,445. Sorry, $280,445 stamp back.
Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity just to speak of UNCTAD. This has to, in the midst of a COVID pandemic, still plan business for life after COVID. And therefore, it's really important that you to take the steps that will help us with broadening the environment in which we're going to operate and to seek to influence the international and global sectors that will have an impact on how we're going to be able to do business and how we're going to be able to earn a living after COVID. And therefore, UNCTAD really has come at a propitious time. UNCTAD is a UN agency that seeks to help developing countries to integrate better into the international environment. Barbados has the absolute privilege of being one of the chairs for this quadrennium. So for the next 4 years, Prime Minister will be chair for the UNCTAD group in relation to the work program of UNCTAD and what it can do for developing countries across the world. Very widely is put forward the fact that the theme for this particular conference will be on the WTO, what happens at the OECD, what happens at all the big international agencies, is that they seek to categorize countries, groupings, and based on that, they're able to determine kinds of resources those countries are likely to have. And so the higher and better your rating is, the less likely it is that you will receive funding and certain types of resources. Barbados has been in that graduate position for a very long time. The problem with that kind of where you are evaluated based on your gross domestic product does not take into consideration certain inherent abilities that you can never change. Things like the size of the country, 166 square miles, and therefore the limitation of population development to be able to create your economic growth. You're located geographically where you may be in the path of hurricanes, and being a small, you are going to be subject to the impact of change, whether it is from rising sea levels, flooding, drought, etc. And a lot of these things cannot change. Even if you look next door at St. Vincent, a volcano is threatening to erupt. Now, if that volcano is a bigger country, it would just disrupt a small area of the country. But an eruption in St. Vincent could seriously threaten the ability of St. Vincent to continue as a country. And it's the same in Barbados in relation to things like climate change. Anything can happen. And it about 50 years of growth in just one night. And difficulty we've had internationally is to persuade the various agencies when they're evaluating our accessibility to funding and assistance is to go beyond the gross domestic product and at a vulnerability index. And therefore, this UNCTAD is giving Barbados the opportunity to put vulnerability upset in the discussion to try to influence and persuade the power to reconsider how they evaluate Barbados. They reevaluate small island states, how they reevaluate land developing countries and the lesser developed countries. And so it is important for us to have this engagement. And so we really welcome the opportunity to so. The issue of climate change is something that we have to pay attention to, even in the midst of this pandemic. And from time to time, you will hear us as a government speaking about the need to create climate resilience, climate friendly in their functioning, to be able to harden our homes so that we can withstand storms, etc., so that housing stock is not wiped out in one night. And because changes that are taking place right now in the United States, for example, with the government, there's going to be a new thrust and a new emphasis on change and what needs to be done. And the envoy appointed current administration of the United States to head up their charge on climate change has said some that I think the world can derive some sort of assurance from in terms of the role that America is seeking to play in relation to climate change. And again, UNCTAD will provide the platform in which we can begin to discuss this in a very meaningful and deep way and be able to discuss ways in which we can change our approach to how we manage helping countries to go to climate change. One of the things, for example, that was shared was the fact that, look, even if America changes posture and does what it needs to do in terms of climate change, if every other country is not in its part to be able to transition in terms of their environmental behaviors, then all will be lost. And therefore, the promise is there that to put more pressure internationally on everyone to be able to try to make more commitments and to hasten their commitments. We trust that this will come with greater support in terms of funding to facilitate developing countries to have access to resources to make the necessary transitions. One of the most exciting things that can come out of this, the absolute need to help our countries to be able to participate in the environmental global value chains that will emerge. In other words, trillions of dollars in gross domestic product can be created from creating climate-friendly products in a climate-friendly way, develop innovative products and services to support a new economy. And what this means is that this has the opportunity to get some of our young people at university, at SJPI, at the Barbados Community College, to start looking at that direction in terms of working with the development of new environmental products, new environmental services, and not only helping Barbados to transform, but also to be identify things that we can sell to the world. And it's anticipated that the gross domestic product, trillions of dollars to be made by countries actually making this transition. Barbados must not be left behind. The developing world must not be left behind. We must participate in these global value chains. Therefore, we have to take the opportunity of the conference to be able to put on the table what it is we expect, we would like to participate, and to ensure that the work program of UNCTAD then gives the assistance to our developing countries to help us take action. The issue of the pandemic and the COVID is going to be top of mind at that as well, where we have to discuss how are we going to build greater resilience in terms of managing pandemics, how can we cooperate better, or is having the discussions around access to vaccines. It is absolutely necessary that everybody understands that if everybody get access to vaccines, then we put recovery, the word recovery, have the conference, and that we prepare our submissions, we have our discussions, and seek to influence the agenda of the program over the next 4 years of UNCTAD to be able to pay attention to these things that will be critical for laying a foundation for Barbados's future and this recovery, along with other developing nations. And so with that, Madam, thank you for the opportunity to share and to just update the country on the importance of the UNCTAD conference and the monies that we are setting aside to be able to do our preparations so that we are not only dealing with the pandemic now, but we're also dealing with our economic recovery as well, and that the government is hard at work on many different fronts, dealing with all the things that affect our families and affect our enterprises. And I thank you much for the opportunity to be able to share.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Yes, Madam Chair. Let me thank the Honourable Member for St. James South. It is important to appreciate that we have to still plan for when Barbados gets through this. And as we have sought to re-engage internationally to press our advocacy with respect to vulnerability, certainly as a small open economy, we are vulnerable to a wide range of international shocks. Climate change clearly is a part of that, and to the extent that the pandemic obviously has impacted us significantly, it is worthy of every effort for us to be able to press the case for small states with respect to the vulnerability conversations, but more importantly, Madam Chair, to ensure that there is greater equity with respect to not just access to vaccines, but certainly a range of other serious issues that will still confront small states after we come out of COVID. So with those 2 words, Madam Chair, I beg to move to Head 32, stand by.
Question is that Head 32 stand par. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 34, Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, in the amount of $908,368.
Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if I'm being heard well enough. Thank you. Madam Chair, I have been listening intently to the interventions made so far. And I think one of the recurring themes of the interventions of honourable members has to do with the notion that these are not ordinary times, and that in fact, we are now in the pandemic that we thought we were in just under a year ago. we are now at that place, and perhaps some may consider what we went through just under a year ago, at the start of this, as perhaps a dry run. Because it is now that we have to put into practice so much of what we were exposed to and so much of the good practice of management of the pandemic that we saw at that time. This Head 34 and the resources being requested here, Madam Chair, are in part to address our public financial management through the strengthening of the cloud suite system that has replaced Smart Stream. And we are aware that there have been some teething problems that often obtain when new technology is introduced, and certainly it has been one of the commitments of this government, and it continues to be one of the commitments of this government, that through the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, that we pay attention to these efficiency issues when it comes to new programs that are being introduced. And I explain. One of the things that I think we saw happening in the past is that decisions were made to adopt new technology without first making sure that the adoption of such technology would be the least disruptive and would be the most sustainable. And so one of the practices that we have agreed to adopt is that before we make any decision to adopt a new technology, a new system, a new application, that through the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, we make sure it is fit for purpose. We take in front so that we know in advance of any disruption it may cause, because we can never, as mere mortals on this planet, suggest that there will never be any disruption to our lives, but at least if we have an idea of the likely disruption, we can mitigate, and we can make sure that we don't impact people's lives in a way from which they are not very easy to recover. So when it comes, for example, to how people are paid and when people are paid, and making sure that people, when they work hard, are paid on time, that we want to make sure that we minimize any disruptions in that regard, because I never like to be in a situation where I know that my resources are guaranteed and the resources of the people for whom we are responsible are not. None of us like to be in that position. I know I certainly do not. And so while there have been some challenges with the implementation of Cloud Suite, these resources are going to help us make sure that we continue to minimize and address those challenges, and that the Ministry of Finance has the wherewithal to make sure that that system continues to be strengthened and continues to be fit for purpose. The second part of these resources under this head, Madam Chair, have to do with the National Population and Housing Census. Now, Madam Chair, you can't see all of my face, but if you could, you might note a small amount. I'm not sure if I should frame it as exasperation or relief, because I'm perhaps feeling the two at the same time. The National Population and Housing Census was due in 2020. 2020 would have been the year 10 from the last 2010 census. A census is done every 10 years. We could not have done it in 2020 because we were managing COVID, and we needed to understand the circumstances under which we were operating, that we didn't know enough about the pandemic at that time before we could send people out to homes to request information. Now, I do want to say that a census of the population is a critical activity. It is not the building of a road or a school, but it does give us the information that we need, absolutely need, in order to develop policy in the name of, on behalf of the people of Barbados. As a technician in a former life, I have never been a fan of acting without evidence. I think that, regrettably in the past, some of us in the region, in general, have not made the best use, perhaps, of the data that's available to us. Too often, what we do is we collect information and we leave it there looking nice and being able to say that we have it, but we need to use it as the evidence base for being able to develop policy. And this is in all aspects of life and of human function. A population and housing census tells us what are people's living conditions, how people experience any range of deprivations as they go through life. It tells us the number of people who are living with disabilities, what disabilities they are living with. It gives us a range of information, Madam Chair, across those 43 questions of that instrument. We've had to move the census to 2021, but there's some other issues in the mix, Madam Chair. One of those will be the subject of another part of this debate this afternoon, and it has to do with the work that the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology is undertaking along with the Electoral and Boundaries Commission to register the population of Barbados and to have a national digital identity for each Barbadian and person who lives here. So that has been established as an important project. We also now have, and has been established as an important project that is about to get underway. We also now have another very critical activity that was referenced by the member for the City of Bridgetown earlier when he spoke. And it has to do with a survey that we are calling Operation Seek and Save. And that is to be able to interact with people in communities to get a sense of the symptoms they're experiencing, not just related to COVID, but also related to dengue fever, which we are simultaneously having to manage through the Ministry of Health and Wellness. And also to get a sense of whether those people are showing evidence or signs that they should be tested and that further interventions should be made. Why is this important? We announced some time ago that there is community spread of COVID-19. But when we say community spread in a context like Barbados, and I, as the representative for a St. Michael constituency, where there are communities where if I yawn and stretch and I put my hand through the window, I will touch my neighbor. That is the way that I grew up in Haggett Hall, and that is characteristic of many of our communities in St. Michael. So when we say community spread, in communities like these, then it becomes a much graver issue than when we hear it in other jurisdictions. And so, again, as I like to say, as Bajans say, we need to take in front. We are perhaps blessed to have a population of this size that we can manage in some reasonable way, that we can have a strong sense of where people are and what they're experiencing so that we can urgently respond. And I consider that, for a country like Barbados, I consider that a blessing, because we are able to react quickly and when circumstances suggest. But, Madam Chair, you don't just get up one day and go out in the road and turn around and say that you're doing a survey. It calls for preparation. We have had to combine the talent and the energy of the University of the West Indies with some of our own technicians in the Barbados Statistical Service, in the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, in the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, under the leadership of the senator in the other place, the minister responsible for foreign affairs. We have been working around the clock, and I have to say thank you to the University of the West Indies and the over 360 students that they are mobilizing to help us with this effort, because it is no small feat to be able to pull this together to execute during the lockdown period, which is when we are targeting. So these resources will allow us to help mobilize some of the colleagues in the Barbados Fiscal Service to be able to give some technical support to that team from the university. But it also allows us to do something else, which gives me some relief and excitement. Cabinet recently agreed that we would establish August 1st, 2021 as Census Day in Barbados. Now, I want to say quickly before people start to get a bit alarmed about all of these surveys and all of this interaction, all of this information, that we consider this a part of one process. And I explain. We have a national registration process that is starting shortly, subject to us being able to respond appropriately to this spike in COVID cases that we're seeing. We have the Seek and Save survey, which is also a household survey. The census in Barbados in 2021 will be a continuation of that exercise. And here is one of the main things that will make it different. We are working feverishly to be able to establish for the first time a partially online census instrument. Now, this is an experiment. I believe in being able to experiment and not always to stay with color within the lines when you have the wherewithal to do so. We know that we do not want high levels of contact at this time. The students who are going out into the field and the public health officials who are going out into the field as part of the Seek and Save are going to be using the protocols that will keep them safe and will keep members of the community safe. Notwithstanding that, we do want to make sure that we are not continuously revisiting people if we don't have to. And so we are getting some help from our development partners to develop an online instrument for the census. That's not to say we will be able to do everything online, but it's going to minimize the level of contact we're going to have in the third and fourth quarter of this year as we do the very important census. And all that Census Day means is that that is the reference point for the census. All it means is that people will be asked to recall where they were on that day, but not necessarily that we start any activities. Now, Madam Chair, in my closing remarks of this intervention, I want to say something that perhaps strengthens some of what we have heard today. And I know that my colleagues will lend me their ear in this honorable chamber as I do so. Now, one of the things that I always used to say as before political life, one of the observations I always used to make, and there are people who think that you drop from the sky as a politician or that you're born big as a politician, but all of us grew up as regular people before we were called to service. I never thought it was the responsibility of any politician to moralize to the people they serve. I don't believe that is what we are doing when we come to speak to our fellow Barbadians. I think what we are attempting to do is to use our platform to share as Barbadians, as Barbadians who help to form part of the leadership of this country that we love. I want to appeal to Barbadians to participate in the survey that we are undertaking, because we are going to be using the established protocols, and really it is important to us to make sure that Barbadians are safe. But I want to say something else about how we participate in this response to COVID. And it is that this is not about blame. It is not about blame, and we've had a lot of discussion in recent weeks about whether this is about open borders, about whether this is about a particular cluster. And I don't seek to get into that again, because that is not the issue. Now, Madam Chair, and I like to link everyday experiences to some of the things that we discuss in this honorable place. I have a practice in my life when it comes to relationships. And I say this I don't say girlfriends because we're all big women. I say this to my woman friends all the time. That, when it comes to relationships and relationship issues, I don't talk about men too much with my women friends. I notice I get some stares. That might be a scandalous thing to say in this honorable place, but I don't. As a practice, I do not. And I'll tell you why. I say to my friends, yes, you do, because I'm going somewhere, Madam Chair. I say to my women friends that you can agonize over a partner's behavior. You can agonize over a man's behavior and wonder why he said that, and wonder if he's still this, and wonder if he was here or went there yesterday. You can agonize. But the truth is that the only behavior you can control is your own. And that is not just with respect to romantic relationships. That is with any relationship. That is with colleagues. That is with work. That is with any engagement or activity in which we find ourselves. The only behavior over which you have any control is your own. My mother always used to tell me, Madam Chair, you cannot know for people. And similarly, you cannot do for people. You cannot act for people. You can only act for yourself. And to do what you know are the things that are going to be able to protect you, your family, and your community. Now, we lost some people to COVID-19 recently, and people may realize that there is a trend in those people who are severely affected by the disease, and that trend is that more and more, the presence of pre-existing conditions may not be the only predetermining factor to who is severely affected by the disease. This pandemic, this disease, the way it is characterized is changing. And no one knows that more than you, Madam Chair, in the practice of your own profession. And so we cannot sit back and think that we know how this thing will affect us, because the profile that we are seeing is healthier and stronger and younger than we were seeing before. And so I want to encourage us all to draw a line, a straight line, between our own behavior and the increase in the cases, the severity of the cases, and how people who are less able to protect themselves are affected by this. In a couple of the cases that we had earlier, the people who regrettably lost their lives, they didn't leave and go anywhere. And so it means that someone who did not perhaps take the appropriate precaution, regrettably was the vector, was the reason that that illness reached them. Now, I know that this is a time where there is some anxiety. There is anxiety globally. But as I close, Madam Chair, I simply want to encourage us all. I don't ever set myself apart from the people in St. Michael South Central and in Barbados with whom we are speaking. I want to remind us all that we can only be responsible for our own behavior, and we can only therefore also hold those close to us accountable. So that if you are sitting somewhere and you see a friend of yours, somebody that you line with, not doing the right things. This morning I had to say to the member for Christchurch East Central, we were in a call with the International Monetary Fund. And I observed him on the screen, scratching his eyes all the time. And I sent him a message to say, as we would say colloquially, big man, you gotta keep your hand on your face. If we see habits, practices, that we know are detrimental to our colleagues, to our friends, to just give them a gentle reminder that these are the things that we need to practice in order to keep ourselves and each other safe. We're gonna have plenty time later as long as we can secure our health and well-being for all the liming in the world. And I'll say something further before I take my seat, Madam Chair. We have, and the member for St. James Central spoke to it at length earlier, we have put in place measures with respect to the opening of shops and mini-marts and supermarkets and the financial support that we will give to those that cannot open. But I will say this, the point of a shelter-in-place policy, which is what this pause is, it is to shelter in place. It is to stop where you are, and if you do not have to move, do not move. That's what we call it in global disasters, sheltering in place. The point of a shelter-in-place policy is to move as little as possible, not to see how you can beat the system and get around it and find the loopholes so that you can move even when you don't need to. This is for all of our protection. And supermarkets will remain open from 8 till 3, it is true. But I appeal to people that to go and get milk on Monday and cheese on Tuesday and bread on Wednesday is going to defeat the purpose of what we are trying to do. I know there are going to be people who, because of the disposable income that they have, will need to move around because they don't have the capacity to shop in advance and keep food in the house. So there are some of us that will need to move around, but for those of us who do not, I appeal to us all, make the appropriate preparation. Just because the lights are on somewhere in a building doesn't mean we need to be there. And so if we want to protect each other, those of us who do not need to be out, please do shelter in place. Please do stay where you are. Because the whole point is to minimize the movement. With my colleagues, I have done some modeling to show the difference between you actually staying put where you are and just a minimal, marginal amount of movement and the difference in spread that can make. That difference in spread translates to another hotel that may need to be stood up to deal with positive cases. That difference in spread translates to another individual that might need to be on a ventilator at Harrison Point or at another facility. You can draw a straight line. I can draw a straight line between my behavior and the impact on somebody else's health. And so with those few words, Madam Chair, I beg to move that head 34, stand part.
Thank you. Yes, but to wrap up.
This is perhaps the soonest wrap up I've ever had to do, but Madam Chair, I beg to move that head 34, stand part.
Question is that head 34 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 81, Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources, in the amount of $75,884,133.
Honorable member for St. Michael West Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The matter before this honorable chamber has to do, as the clerk indicated, a supplementary resolution in the amount of $75.884 million. And Madam Chair, the first part relates to the IAD Road Rehabilitation Program, where the ministry is seeking a supplementary for $800,000 to complete the professional works as part of the IADB Road Rehabilitation Program. Members may be aware that the IADB sought to assist us to improve the quality of our road infrastructure, and a comprehensive road connectivity report was prepared. The program essentially was divided into three components: a civil works component, of which we anticipate to rehabilitate a number of roads across Barbados. The second component had to do with the institutional strengthening within the ministry itself. And the third component, which included implementation support for some $3 million. Madam Chair, the Global Roads Program is critical to the overall infrastructure program within the ministry and certainly in the country. And I might just like to tell you that as part of the that program, the government rehabilitated approximately 31 kilometers of key segments of primary road network, as well as drainage and the construction of sidewalks and culverts and other safety measures. Indeed, there were 5 sample roads. Those sample roads were completed, and we are now faced with a situation where we are left with additional 10 roads, of which we will make a determination on 6. So the amount in 800,000 is meant to supplement the professional services in respect of the IADB Global Roads Program. In respect of the Transport Board, the request for approximately 23.759 million, this has to do with the increase in subsidy to the Transport Board. As we are all aware, the country is currently in a pandemic, and as a result, ridership at the State-owned Transport Board declined, and it declined excessively. We find ourselves in a position where we need to have additional operations support, and we've come to this place to request the amounts of 23.7 million. We also have a situation where we have some outstanding trade payables, and also to complete the retrofit program that has given tremendous benefits to the Transport Board. I might also add that notwithstanding the requests that the Transport Board and the management team set out to contain its overall expenditure. And you may recall, Madam Chair, that going back to financial year 2019-2020, that the Transport Board had reduced its losses, and that is an audited figure, by some $8.39 million, compared to the previous year when they had incurred losses of $22.064 million. Notwithstanding this situation, the board, like I said, continues to be challenged with severe cash flow challenges because of the current situation, and we have been plagued by a reduction in ridership, general passenger ridership, which is our major source of revenue and cash flow. For example, at the end of December 2020, total cash fares had declined by approximately $4.1 million compared to the same period last year. That is from April 1 to December 31 of this year compared to the same period last year. Although we've expanded the TAP program, we've been able to improve our services throughout the country. We have been able to improve the frequency of services across Barbados, and we've also added some new routes. And I think we can all agree that there's very few criticisms of the Transport Board in respect of where it's going. And I want to take this opportunity as well to thank the operators in the TAP program for their continued discipline and their service in respect to augmenting public transport in Barbados. I might also add that the electric buses that we procured, the first batch that we procured, they continue to perform very well. We've had a situation where the cost of diesel decreased by over $2 million, or 34.5% saving. We've also had, due to the performance of that fleet, a significant reduction in bus maintenance costs, especially in areas of brake, engine, and transmission changes, or replacements as referred to it. We've also had additional 23 powertrain units in the service, which contributed to a reduction in our overall expenditure. Of course, we are continuing to work on our quality assurance initiatives to enhance policies to ensure that we maximize the operating efficiency of the Transport Board units. But that notwithstanding, because of the prevailing situation, we are faced with the harsh reality that we have to pay some creditors, and this money that we are seeking sets out at 313, that's account code 313, it sets out the requirement for 23.7 million, and like I said, to pay a number of creditors. Don't need to go into the long list of creditors. Madam Chair, in respect of 416, which is the grant to public institutions, for the sum of about 24.4 million. What we're essentially doing here is bringing to book expenditure required for the additional purchase of the 14 electric buses. As you're aware, we bought the first 33 units. We are now in the process of getting ready to finalize those units to be shipped to Barbados. And the requirement here is to facilitate the payment to those entities, BYD. As we all know, the electric buses continue to perform well. We don't have any complaints whatsoever in respect of the electric buses. The performance, I must tell you, is admirable. And I believe that Barbadians would join and support me in saying that that those electric buses, certainly that they have transformed the public transport landscape in addition to having zero emissions in Barbados. They're doing very well, and I believe that our communities are very happy with the performance of those electric buses. We anticipate we should have the additional 14 electric buses in Barbados no later than the beginning of July. And once those are here, they will be on the road to complement the existing fleet. And as we move to an electric fleet, what it does for us at the Transport Board, and the ministry certainly, is to ensure that we continue to reduce the losses associated with the Transport Board. So in respect of the sub-program 542, the Barbados Water Authority for 26.826 million, the minister and the ministry will also address that matter briefly, but I felt that it was necessary to give the House an explanation in respect of the request for supplementary funding for the ministry under Head 81. And with that, Madam Chair, I beg to move that Head 81 in the amount of $75,884,133,000 stamp part.
Honourable Member for St. John.
Madam Chair, there's several constituencies, not excluding mine, that is being impacted by the water situation in this country. This supplementary of $28,826,987 is being sought, Madam Chair, to alleviate the problem in several of those same constituencies, if not all, in due course. I know that the honourable member to my right from St. Peter is keen for this particular supplementary to go through because he, similar to the honourable member for St. Lucie, are also being impacted by the water situation in this country. Madam Chair, this government is a caring government. To the fact that we are now providing this additional money to supplement what is there to augment the water situation in this country is clearly an indication of what is happening. Now, all of us in this honorable chamber are fully aware that this should not be the situation today when over $1 billion was squandered at the same entity. But staff, Madam Chair, at the Barbados Water Authority, all of them are working in concert to ensure that we have water running again on a regular basis through our taps. This particular funding is supposed to facilitate 7 major projects at the Barbados Water Authority. We're looking at a desal plant at Colleton in St. Lucie. We're looking at one at Mullins in St. Peter. We're looking at finalizing the situation of the Vineyard project that is bringing water from Vineyard to make sure that water in the eastern corridor, which is my constituency, St. Joseph, part of St. Andrew, and St. Peter, is happening. Highway 1 and Highway 7 is also a part of the process as it relates to funding under this, this money. In addition to that, Madam Chair, we have the upgrade from St. Stephen's to Lodge Hill. And I know the Attorney General was concerned as well that half of his constituency would probably not be sorted with the water that is coming from the Vineyard project, but this particular initiative that is taking water from St. Stephen to Lodge Hill will ensure that the other half of his constituency is also taken care of. Madam Chair, there are also funds. These funds will also complete 3 reservoirs that are already going: Fort George Heights, Boscobel, and Lodge Hill. Madam Chair, one of the things that we have found in the BWA is that we're actually losing 40% of the water. We call it non-revenue water because of the poor mains that are in place. And this is one of the things that is impacting us. 40% of the water that we're pushing through the mains are actually going into the ground. And it is a major problem. So one of the things that we need to do soonest is to ensure that we too embark on a major mains replacement program in those areas that are being impacted. We have situations in Gibbons, for example, where the Gibbons community is at a level where it is close to the reservoir. So when there's a peak time, then that particular community, because of where it is situated, is impacted as it relates to having water on a consistent basis. In St. Lucie is probably one of the main areas where we're having a situation with the burst mains. You fix at this point, and as soon as you repair that, the right side, there's a burst again. So we are working, and the team, like I said, everybody is working in concert to ensure that the water situation in this island is rectified. We have a problem, Madam Chair, with resources, but like I said just now, this supplementary will take care of that. We have a problem as it relates to manpower, but we too are trying to fix that particular problem in terms of having staff to deal with all of the water situations that you would see, not particularly burst mains, but what we would call the domestic issues that are happening where people will call and say that, you know, this has been out for X amount of time. We are on the job, the team is on the job, ensuring that we can rectify that particular problem as soon as possible. So, Madam Chair, I don't want to delay the chamber any longer. There will be another point in time where I will go into details as it relates to all of these projects. What I will say to you is that several of the projects were impacted by a combination of COVID and a combination of Mother Nature. The Vineyard project in particular is behind by maybe a month or a month and a half as a result of rain. It is behind as a result of the contractors who came in to manufacture or to construct those 2 7,000-gallon storage tanks at Mount Pleasant. They had to be quarantined. So like I said, there's a combination of Mother Nature and Vineyard and COVID that impacted the work at that particular location. In a similar vein, we have also had that particular problem on Highway 1, but I don't want to go into that. So, Madam Chair, at this time, I beg that Head 518 in the amount of $26,827,987 stand par.
Head 81.
Sorry?
You says head 18, it's head 81.
Head 81, I'm sorry.
Question is that head 81 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 83, Ministry of Agriculture, Food Security. in the amount of $15,768,744.
Honourable Member for St. Lucie.
Madam Chair, no one can at this point in time underscore the importance of the agricultural sector to Barbados. Agriculture is of utmost importance to this economy, and this administration, at the very outset in 2018, as we came into office, focused directly on agriculture and food security by the establishment of that ministry. Of this amount today, and I don't intend to delay the chamber too long with a long speech, 7 million is for the start of the 2021 sugar harvest, which we hope will be started later this month. And the remaining 7 million will be in support of cultivation services, such as the breaking of the hard pan soil, and given to the Barbados Agricultural Management Corporation for efficiency and bringing back more lands into cultivation in terms of the boosting of our sugar industry as well as the cotton industry. I took a tour last week of lands in the northern section. I began actually in the northern section of the country, and I was well pleased with the work being done there. These funds would also be for the benefit of rotation crops across the sector. Now, in 2020, at the end of 2020, we had seen an overall increase of 7% in our crop production, and this is absolutely important, and we are definitely trending, moving in the right direction in this particular sector. We have as well, these funds will assist in measures to stimulate increased livestock production. Now, the Black Belly Sheep program will be one that we will be focusing on as we are looking to have as many as 1 million Black Belly Sheep in this sector. Animal nutrition is also another important aspect of it, and we also have equipment. Part of it would be equipment, which would bring general support services to farmers in this country. Now, as we speak, we have actually embarked on a National Erosion and Aquifer Recharge Program. You heard the Honourable Member for St. John even talking about the scarcity of water, and certainly in my constituency, I have experienced that for a number of years now, and I understand the angst of the Honourable Member for St. Joseph as well, because we do recall that in 2016, in those months between June and December, particularly for St. Lucie for sure, we had extreme difficulty as it relates to the supply of water. But agriculture has a part to play, of course. With agriculture, in order to contribute, we do need water more than anything else. And we have embarked on a National Erosion and Aquifer Recharge Program. This is where we're obviously, let me put it this way, manicuring our hedgerows, good husbandry in terms of at our farms. We also, a very important aspect of this will be the cleaning of some 75 plantation wells to allow for the catching of water when we have these significant amount of rainfall, which perhaps certainly we experienced last year in certain sections of the country, both in 2020 and
in 2019. And I want to say that we are heading in the right direction, and we intend to use these funds absolutely wisely, because Barbados needs the agricultural sector to flourish, and to flourish well in this particular kind of environment, but even beyond this. And so, Madam Chair, with these few words, I beg to move that head 83 in the amount of 15,768.
15 million.
15 million, sorry, 15,768,000. What was the other? 768,700 stand park.
744. Seconder. Question is that head 82 in the amount of $15,768,744 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. Just to remind members that we have 20 more minutes left in the session.
Head 15, Cabinet Office, in the amount of $884,451.
Honorable member for Christchurch East Central.
Madam Chair, just to be brief, as you are aware, the Electoral Bonus Commission is undertaking the project to deal with the issuance of the new ID, and the monies being requested here is to facilitate the acquisition of the software that would deal with the biometric capturing of fingerprints as part of that specific exercise. And therefore, as we move to provide the citizens of Barbados with greater use of digital versions of ID to facilitate a range of services digitally going forward, this particular acquisition will be critical for allowing us to determine with certainty some of the biometrics around that. As you're aware, this will be a critical part of how we move forward with respect to the provision of not just government services, but equally improving access and critical ID information with respect to preventing any issues related to cybersecurity and such things. And therefore, the sum of money being asked here is to be able to engage in that procurement. And therefore, with that, I beg to move that head 15 stand par.
Question is that head 15 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 39, Ministry of International Business and Industry, in the amount of $2,670,896.
Honorable member for St. Michael North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amount being sought today covers primarily the development and implementation of what's called a business licensing integrated secured system, BLIS, for the International Business Unit. This, when implemented, will in fact ensure that the International Business Unit now is fully digitalized. Going forward, it is impossible to continue, given the competition that we have, to continue doing things manually. At present, all applications received for licenses or for renewal of licenses are all processed manually. And in fact, their total ballpark, Madam Chair, in the range of some 4,000 such applications per year. Manually processing this takes, on average, about 5 to 6 months, and we simply cannot continue with that state of affairs if we are to remain and to be seen as to be competitive. This system complements an already digitalized system in relation to economic substance, which was installed approximately a year ago or so. And in fact, when those two systems are combined with the fact that we are also going to be fully digitalizing as well the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office will mean that insofar as our interface with the business community in relation to particularly the startup of businesses, particularly international businesses where they're registered and so on, that the Ministry of International Business would then be fully digitalized. And I think, Madam Chair, that is something for which we can all be proud. I'm going to keep it brief, as I've been told to. The other sums there relate to staffing of the International Business Unit and the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, where there's one officer, analysts going to the International Business Unit to continue to strengthen the human resources dealing with the effective regulation of the sector as required by the OECD. And similarly, the other officers are assigned to the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, and they too are being tasked to meet certain requirements, particularly as it relates to our anti-money laundering operations. And that basically, Madam Chair, explains what this supplementary is about. And with those few words, using the executive summary approach as opposed to the full text approach, I beg to move that Head 39 stand part.
Question is that Head 39 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 82, Ministry of Environment and National Beautification, in the amount of $2,974,400.
Honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
Sorry, Madam Chair, the sums of money being requested here under this head relates to the retirement benefits associated with the National Conservation Commission, and to the extent that the Commission has had, yes, the Commission has had to use its existing budget to address a number of retirees over the course of the financial year, as well as advancing a number of operational issues with respect to the cleanliness of Barbados. These sums are now being requested with respect to being able to regularize their operations for the remainder of the financial year. And so, Madam Chair, I beg to move that the sum of $2,974,400 stand part under Head 82.
Question is that Head 82 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Head 93, Ministry of Housing, Land Maintenance, in the amount of $23 million.
Honourable member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. These sums of monies have varying uses. The one to me that is of primary importance, of course, is to be able to build some quads, which are essentially apartment blocks that have 4 units for rental. And it's going to cost us about $4 million. We're hoping to build at least 40 of them between Lower Burney and Coombs, which is Coombs House is there just off White Park. And this is important because of several things. First thing, although we also have programs to build houses for sale, there are some people that will always have to rent accommodation. And it's been a long time since the National Housing Corporation has had an opportunity to build rental accommodation. And this will open up this opportunity for us to start building rental accommodation and make rental accommodation available. Because we're inundated with requests for rental accommodation all the time. And this will give us, this sum of money will give us opportunities to do that. More important than that, building the rental accommodation, however, Madam Chair, what this also does is gives us an opportunity to put people back to work. And this is critical at this time. The COVID pandemic is a double crisis. It is a health crisis, and it's a health crisis because obviously people have passed, and again, like the Minister of Health, I would like to give condolences to those people who have passed. Some 1,600 people have actually contracted COVID in Barbados. That number of people don't have it now, but those are the number of people that have contracted it. From a straight percentage point of view, we would expect that there's a percentage of people who would be mortally impacted by this disease. There's morbidity and mortality involved, and the mortality is of greatest significance. And clearly, even one person passing from this pandemic and this virus is one person too much. But greater than that, and greater significance that we're seeing, is the economic impact. And the economic impact has touched every single person in this country. In fact, I would dare to say the economic impact continues to touch every single person in the world. And that's because of these problems of decreases in economic activity and the associated effects that it has caused. And we're in a situation where we have multiple people out of jobs, out of work, and any opportunity that we have to put people back to work after this national pause is something that we must concentrate on. And that is the focus that we are working on at the National Housing Corporation and the Ministry of Housing. And all of the majority of this money that we're voting for, first this to build the quads, then we have money for relocation, 306. Then we have money also in there, 5 million, to continue the National Housing Corporation, the work of the corporation. And then there's 7 million in there as well to pay for rents, because we've had to expand our rental capacity as more and more people need space to be able to move around, accommodate government businesses. So all of this money is focused at putting people back to work, jump-starting the economy as soon as the national pause has come to end, and let's hit the ground running as soon as we're back to work. I beg to move, Madam Chair, that this sum of money, and also there's a change. I saw that 22 million was in there, but it actually should be, when I total it up, it should be 23 million. So as amended, it should be 23 million that this amount is voted for. So now ask that head, that 23 million, stand part.
Question is that head 93 as amended stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one money resolution in Standing Finance Committee.
Question is that I do not report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one money resolution in committee. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one resolution in Standing Finance Committee. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we've come to the end. Sorry. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the resolution be read a first time.
The question is that the resolution be read a first time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the resolution be now read a second time.
The question is that the aforementioned resolution be read a second time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the resolution be now agreed to.
Questions that the resolution now be agreed to. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
Mr. Speaker, with that, we've come to the end of today's sitting. I beg to move the adjournment of the House until the 23rd of February at 10 a.m. Tuesday, the 23rd, sir.
The question is that this honourable chamber stands adjourned until the 23rd of February at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 23rd day of February at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.